The air was cool enough to make the glass facade of Titan Bank glisten like polished steel. From the sidewalk, I could see my reflection navy blazer pressed, hair tied back, a small white box of croissants balanced in one hand. It was a gesture more than a gift, meant for the SOC team who had kept the backbone of the bank running alongside me for decades. In my bag were handwritten notes for each board member, the kind of thing you only do when you're certain you're leaving on good terms. I was supposed to be one day away from the end. The early retirement package had been negotiated months before $2.2 million lump sum, lifetime health care, and the promise of a send-off breakfast tomorrow. 22 years of building the system that moved $22 billion a day was about to end quietly, without ceremony but without bitterness. The elevator hummed to the 42nd floor. Before I could even greet the receptionist, her eyes flicked to the phone on her desk. "Mr. Kellen would like to see you," she said. Brett Kellen was 36 and carried himself like every camera in the city was aimed at him. The executive lounge was just as curated. Walnut paneling, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Hudson in pale autumn light. On the table between us sat a white envelope. "Effective immediately," he said, pushing it toward me. "Strategic restructuring." No handshake, no pause, just the polished delivery of someone reading a script. I glanced at the letter, my name, my title, today's date, and then back at him. That's final. His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Enjoy your retirement." I reached for my laptop, the movement smooth, unhurried. As the lid closed, a faint pulse of light flickered across his monitor. Aurora condition check initiated. He didn't notice. I stood, tucking the envelope into my bag. Enjoy trying to run a bank without a system. My voice was calm, almost cordial. The hallway outside was quiet except for the click of my heels against marble. I didn't look back. The croissants were still in my hand, warm through the paper. As I passed the glass wall of the SOC, they'd understand soon enough. By the time the elevator doors closed, Aurora had already begun to listen for the sound it was built to hear, 22 years earlier. Titan Bank's technology hub wasn't a sleek glass tower. It was a cramped basement in lower Manhattan, walls sweating in summer and icy in winter. The server room felt like a meat locker year-round, the air sharp with the metallic tang of cooled steel. I'd sit on a folding chair between two racks of humming IBM mainframes, my parka zipped to the chin, pen scratching across a yellow legal pad. I was building what would become Aegis Core, the transaction engine that could move billions in seconds without losing a cent in the process. At the time, it didn't even have a name, just the backbone written at the top of my notes. Those early days were powered by stubbornness and bad coffee. I wrote code long after everyone else had gone home, sketching logic trees in the margins of receipts when I ran out of paper. Every layer I added felt like laying another stone in a foundation meant to last for decades. Then came the night that shifted everything. A set of anomalies in the transaction logs, tiny, deliberate distortions caught my eye. Following them down the rabbit hole, I saw it clearly internal money laundering, dressed up as clerical error. I took the findings to an executive I thought I could trust. He smiled, thanked me, and by the next week, the issue was buried so deep it might as well have never existed. I was quietly cut out of oversight meetings after that. That was when I started writing Protocol Aurora. It wasn't a kill switch. It wasn't sabotage. It was a boundary code that would recognize if I was removed without a signed retirement transition. In that event, Aurora would lock root-level access, not to harm the bank, but to protect its integrity from whoever thought ethics were optional. I never spoke about it. Not because I feared consequences, but because I wanted to believe the system stewards would never push me to use it. I was wrong. Now, Walking out of the executive lounge with Brett's envelope in my bag, I knew the quiet hum of Aurora was no longer just code. It was a line they had chosen to cross. Brett Kellen arrived with the kind of resume that made business magazines swoon, venture capital darling, serial disruptor, keynote speaker at every tech conference that would have him. He swept into Titan Bank promising agility and modernization, tossing those words around like they were currency. To him, legacy systems weren't a backbone, they were dead weight. It didn't take long before familiar faces in the engineering department began disappearing. Senior architects, network veterans, security analysts with decades of experience gone. In their place came consultants in tailored suits, fluent in buzzwords and flashy KPIs, but untested when it came to actual system resilience. The SOC, once a fortress of calm precision, started to feel like a showroom. At the annual gala, Brett stood at the podium under crystal chandeliers, flashing his rehearsed grin for donors and press. I kept my distance, speaking with a few of the older directors who still remembered the first years of Aegis Core. My phone buzzed mid-conversation as Slack notification from the general channel. It was a screenshot, Brett's direct message to his deputy CTO, intended to be private but somehow leaked Leona's the last piece of outdated hardware. Time to pull the plug. The room didn't feel cold, but something inside me froze. I didn't confront him. I didn't even let my expression change. That kind of insult didn't warrant a reaction, it warranted a record. I saved the screenshot to a secure drive. Weeks later, I compiled a document for the board titled Ethical Exit Protocols. Inside, I detailed the existence of Aurora, not the keys, not the triggers, just the framework, and why it was necessary for a responsible handover. The document tracker later confirmed what I suspected: 0 views. That was the moment I stopped trying to be heard. If the people entrusted with the fortress wanted the gates torn down, they would eventually get their wish, and when they did, Aurora would be there. Not to save me, but to save what I had built. It wouldn't take long before they gave me the reason to let it run. 29 minutes after the security desk deactivated my badge, the first signal came from Miami. An ATM in Coral Gables froze mid-transaction, the screen flashing authentication path unavailable. At first glance, it looked like a local hiccup, maybe a network glitch, a faulty router. By 8:50 a.m., Chicago reported the same error. Then Dallas. The problem wasn't confined to one coast. It was crawling across the map, inside the Manhattan SOC. The wall-sized dashboard was usually a sea of calm green. Now, islands of yellow began to appear, each marking a disrupted authentication node. The shift was subtle at first, but the engineers noticed. They always did. I could picture them in that glass-walled command center, headsets on, voices clipped, scanning logs. They'd start with the usual fixes, refresh routing tables, cycle the authentication servers, run a quick rollback. But none of it would work. One of them, probably Janelle, the lead systems engineer, would eventually try to bypass the central authentication pathway entirely. She'd log in using the Tier 1 emergency credentials, the ones stored in a fireproof safe in the SOC manager's office. She'd type each character with precision, knowing those keys had never failed. Until now. Access denied. She'd try again, this time with the Tier 2 override, the one issued from the CTO's office, and again. The answer would come back. Architect signature required L. VERAC. No one would say it out loud right away, but the truth would hang in the air. The one person who could pass that check had walked out less than an hour ago with her badge shredded and her contract void. Aurora was awake now, no longer a dormant line of code buried in the architecture. It was listening, verifying, sealing doors. It was never supposed to open unless that single condition was met, and from my loft across the river. I knew every heartbeat of the system's pulse. I'd built it to be invisible, but I also knew exactly when it began to hum. The hum had started by 9:20 a.m. Tighten Down was climbing the trending list, sandwiched between celebrity gossip and a congressional hearing. Someone had filmed a line of customers outside a Miami branch, holding up their phones to show the same frozen ATM screen. The clip was looping on social media, racking up views. On the 40th floor of Titan Bank's headquarters, the crisis room was all glass walls and tension. A massive live map dominated the space, each branch marked in green or, more and more often, red. The spread was no longer gradual. Entire regions were blinking out in clusters. Mortgage approvals were stuck mid-signature. Wire transfers hung in limbo. Corporate payroll batches queued but never cleared. In another hour, high-net-worth clients would start calling board members directly, bypassing customer service entirely. The room was thick with overlapping voices. Legal counsel on one side, IT heads on the other. Brett stood at the center, jacket off, tie loosened, trying to project control but failing. "Get her back," he snapped. "Offer whatever it takes. I don't care what it costs." HR made the first call. My phone buzzed on the counter beside the stove, where water boiled for tea. I watched the screen light up with the bank's main number. I didn't touch it. The ringing stopped. A minute later, a different number. Then another. I let them pass, listening to the kettle begin to whistle. Across the river, I knew the crisis room would be shifting from ordered chaos to outright panic. They'd be replaying security footage from the morning, the one where I walked out with a white envelope in my bag. They'd zoom in on my face, looking for some clue that I'd done this on purpose. But Aurora didn't care about their theories. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the condition being met, and the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The whistle of the kettle rose to a sharp pitch. I poured the water, steady-handed, and reached for the tin of peppermint tea. Somewhere behind me, my phone started ringing again. This time, it was Brett's direct line. The afternoon light spilled across my loft in long, quiet stripes, catching on the spines of old programming books stacked too deep on the shelves. Between them sat antique drafting tools, brass compasses, slide rules reminders that precision was once built by hand, not by template. My phone lit up again, this time with Brett's name in bold letters. I let it ring once before answering. Leona. His voice was taut but trying for calm. "Sign back in, and we'll undo this. We'll reinstate you retroactive benefits, a bigger package, whatever you want. Just get the system back online." I let the silence stretch until I could almost hear him shifting in his chair. "Brett," I said finally, "you can't bring me back to a moment that's already passed. This isn't Aurora doesn't recognize me anymore." I cut in. "It isn't about flipping a switch or typing in a code. The condition triggered when you terminated my contract at that moment. The system decided you no longer had an architect it could trust. I don't even have the clearance now." "That's not possible," he said, the edge breaking through his practiced tone. "You built it. You can override it. I built it so no one could override it, not even me, once that trust was broken." I could picture him leaning forward, voice low, believing he could negotiate with code the same way he negotiated with people. But code doesn't compromise. It either runs or it doesn't. "I have board members breathing down my neck," he said, his voice rising. "This is going to ruin us." "That's not my doing," I replied. "That's the structure doing exactly what it was designed to do." There was a sharp exhale on the line. Then nothing. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the counter. The steam from my mug curled into the air as I carried it to the wide window overlooking the street below. Somewhere out there, Brett was discovering that for all his authority, some doors, once closed, don't open again. And inside the tower, he still occupied. The red was spreading across their maps. By 10:00 a.m., the markets had already drawn blood. Titan Bank stock was in free fall, down 21%, erasing $3.4 billion in market capitalization in less than 2 hours. The ticker on the financial news feed pulsed red, our name wedged between headlines about tech layoffs and oil prices. In Los Angeles, customers formed a line that wrapped around the block, some holding withdrawal slips, others filming on their phones. Houston's flagship branch reported the same, the sidewalk crowd spilling into the street. The footage made it to the midday news cycle, amplifying the panic. Inside the crisis room, the map of our network was nearly all red now, with only a few isolated pockets of green where legacy systems still processed local transactions. The engineers looked hollow-eyed, speaking in clipped sentences as they ran scenario after scenario. None of them ended quickly. Janelle, the lead systems engineer, delivered the estimate without inflection, 7 months and $480 million to rebuild Aegis Core from scratch. That was the optimistic projection, assuming no further losses, no regulatory freeze, and no public collapse of confidence. Brett had been pacing for most of the morning, circling the table, checking his watch, shooting quick orders to anyone who would still meet his eye. But as Janelle's words settled over the room, he stopped mid-step. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't have a pitch, a smile, or a quick fix. I imagined the silence in that room, broken only by the low hum of the servers they could no longer command. The board members would already be counting the cost, not just in dollars, but in faith lost from clients who measured security in decades, not quarters. From my loft, I sipped my cooling tea and watched a delivery truck unload crates into the cafe across the street. Life in Brooklyn moved forward, oblivious to the implosion across the river and inside Titan Bank. Every second that passed was another strand of their webs snapping loose. By early afternoon, the real blow landed not in the stock market, but in the legal department, somewhere between frantic calls to outside counsel and combing through archived contracts. One of the junior attorneys opened a file they'd never paid much attention to, U.S. Patent No. US 594733B, filed June 14, 12 years earlier. Inventor Leona Veyrak, assignee Veyrak Systems, LLC. The full architecture of Aegis Core, down to its layered encryption and root authentication logic, sat under my name. The license agreement was unambiguous. Titan Bank had the right to use and maintain Aegis Core only while I was employed in good standing. Termination without cause was allowed under the contract, but the moment they invoked it, all rights to the system reverted to my company. By firing me that morning, they hadn't just lost access, they'd voided their legal right to operate the code at all. And there was more. A clause in the licensing terms imposed a daily penalty for unauthorized use, calculated as a percentage of the system's operating value, by keeping Aegis Core running past my termination. Titan Bank was already racking up damages in the millions every 24 hours, a fresh invoice, enforceable in court. I imagined the scene in that conference room, the general counsel holding the printed patent file like a live grenade, explaining to Brett and the board that their crown jewel wasn't theirs to keep, that every attempt to restart, override, or recompile the code wasn't just technically futile, it was now legally prohibited. No one had cared to read the fine print when the bank's leadership decided an early retirement payout was too costly. They thought they were saving money. Instead, they had triggered a bleed that no investor deck could hide. Across the East River. I closed the file I'd kept for my own records and sat back in my chair. The numbers would speak louder than anything I could say. And tomorrow, those numbers would be bigger. By the next morning, I knew the speculation had reached a fever pitch. Analysts on the financial networks were arguing over whether this was sabotage, negligence, or some kind of hostile takeover. My inbox, the one linked to VARAC Systems, was stacked with requests for comment from journalists, former colleagues, and people I hadn't heard from in 20 years. I sent only one reply, posted publicly through the company's official channel. It was 3 sentences long. I withdrew only what was mine, my trust. The rest is just code. Any assumptions beyond that are not my concern. The words landed like a quiet strike. Within an hour, screenshots of the post were circulating on cybersecurity forums. Threads titled "Systems Sentinel" began popping up, engineers dissecting my phrasing as if it were part of an encryption key. Some called it a masterclass in protective architecture. Others, a warning to every executive who thought technical skill could be replaced with marketing polish. By midday, the board's internal struggles had spilled into the press. Multiple outlets confirmed that Brett Kellen had been suspended pending a formal investigation for gross negligence and reckless termination of critical personnel. The language was precise, and for once, not softened for public relations. His headshot disappeared from the leadership page before the afternoon market close. I didn't gloat. The story was no longer mine to tell. It was moving through other hands, other voices, becoming something larger than the morning it began. For years, I had argued quietly, in meeting rooms and in memos, that trust was the true currency of any system. Now, without intending to, I'd given the market a live demonstration. Late that evening, as I shut down my computer, a new message blinked in from an encrypted forum I'd frequented in my early career. It was a simple line from an anonymous handle: "Guardians don't need applause, just gates that stay shut until the right hands return." I closed the laptop, the echo of those words following me into the quiet. 2 months later, Titan Bank was still limping through a partial rebuild. Their stock had stabilized but well below its former highs, and entire product lines were still offline. Across the country, Apex Federal Bank's Systems You Can Trust campaign dominated every major billboard and transit ad, their logo plastered on buses and subway cars. It was a message aimed like an arrow at Titan Bank's bruised reputation. I hadn't retired. Instead, I split my weeks between Boston and New York, consulting for a small fintech startup run out of a converted brick warehouse near the harbor. They were bright, stubborn engineers with more ideals than budget, and I liked that about them. My role wasn't to write code so much as to guide it, mentoring them on how to build systems that could survive both technical failure and human compromise. One afternoon, over coffee in the startup's communal kitchen, a young coder named Maya asked me, "Why not just build another Aegis core?" "You've already done it once." I smiled, stirring sugar into my mug. "Because architecture isn't about control," I said. "It's about stewardship." Aegis Core was designed to protect a single institution. That was its strength and its flaw. She frowned. "So, what would you build instead?" I glanced toward the whiteboard in the corner, covered in sketches and flow diagrams that only a few here truly understood. "I'm already building it," I told her. "Aurora 2. This time, it won't belong to one bank. It'll be shared across a coalition of institutions that agree to common ethical standards. No single CEO can dismantle it for a quarterly report. No board can bury it for convenience." Her eyes widened. "Can that even work?" "It has to," I said simply. Weeks later, I stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., at a financial systems conference. The room was filled with regulators, technologists, and industry leaders. My talk was titled, "The Future of Trust in Financial Systems." I spoke about resilience, about designing systems that value integrity as much as uptime, and about the cost of ignoring the human element in security. My voice was calm, measured, but resolute. The applause that followed was polite, but I wasn't there for the ovation. I was there to mark the start of something new, something they couldn't corrupt. No matter how much power they thought they had,